The phone rang once, then twice. Richard Lawson almost ignored it. Calls at midnight usually meant business, not family. But something in his gut froze when he finally answered. "Hello?" His voice was sharp, impatient. On the other end, a small, trembling voice whispered, "Mr. Your son, Ethan. He's on the ground. He's not moving." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. His pulse hammered in his ears. "What? Who is this?" "Where's my son?" The girl stammered, breathless. "My name's Maya. I don't know what happened. He's bleeding. Please hurry." Silence filled Richard's penthouse. The city lights outside suddenly felt cold, meaningless. His billion-dollar empire, worthless in this single terrifying moment. He could hear traffic in the background, car horns blaring, strangers shouting. The world moved on as his own stopped. "Don't hang up," Richard barked, voice cracking. "Stay with him. Do not leave him." "I won't," Maya whispered. Her tone was small but steady. Stronger than he expected. Stronger than he was in that moment. Richard's chest heaved. Sweat trickled down his back. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, controlled markets, but he couldn't control this. And as sirens wailed in the distance, one truth seared into him. This was only the beginning. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and fear. White walls, buzzing lights, nurses moving in swift bursts of urgency. Richard Lawson stood frozen at the glass partition, his tailored suit now wrinkled, his polished shoes squeaking against the linoleum as he shifted his weight. Inside the room, Ethan lay still, pale. A bruise darkened his temple, a line of dried blood tracing the curve of his cheek. Machines beeped steadily, reminding Richard of the one thing he had no control over, whether his son would open his eyes again. Richard's hands trembled. He buried them in his pockets, forcing composure. Billionaires don't shake. Billionaires don't panic. But in that sterile room, stripped of boardroom armor, he was nothing but a father who had failed to protect his child. Behind him, a nurse spoke gently. "Sir, she's waiting outside." "Who?" His voice was curt, defensive. "The girl who called?" Richard turned. Maya Carter sat in a plastic chair, swinging her legs nervously. Her clothes were worn, a size too big, patched in places that whispered of struggle. Her sneakers were scuffed with laces that were mismatched. She clutched a small flip phone in her lap, the screen cracked but still glowing faintly. Her eyes lifted as Richard approached. "Big, brown, cautious but unflinching. You called me?" His words were clipped, suspicion wrapped around them like barbed wire. "Yes, sir," Maya said softly. I stayed with him until the ambulance came." Richard studied her. 11, maybe 12, skin too familiar with hardship. A child who looked like the world had already tested her more than it ever should. "You didn't run?" he asked, half to himself. She shook her head. "He needed someone," Richard blinked. For a second he saw Ethan at that age, bright-eyed, gap-toothed, tugging at his sleeve for attention he too often denied. The memory stabbed him with guilt. "Thank you," he muttered, almost reluctant. Gratitude wasn't a language he spoke often. Maya's lips pressed into a thin smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She glanced toward the emergency room window, then back at Richard. "Is he gonna be okay?" Richard hesitated. His empire taught him to deliver certainty, never doubt. But here, he had none. "I don't know," he admitted, voice low. Hours later, when Ethan stabilized, Richard found himself seated across from Maya in the hospital cafeteria. Steam curled from untouched coffee between them. "Where are your parents?" Richard asked. Maya's gaze dropped to the table. "Don't have any." "Not really. You live with—" "Sometimes my aunt. Sometimes other places." She shrugged, trying to sound casual. But her knuckles whitened as she gripped her cup of juice. Richard frowned. He had seen neglected neighborhoods from the back seat of tinted cars, places his wealth never touched. Yet sitting across from Maya made those places feel real in a way spreadsheets never could. "You shouldn't have been out that late," he said. It came out harsher than intended. Maya looked up, meeting his eyes squarely. "Neither should your son." The words hit him like a slap. For a moment, silence thickened between them. Then Richard exhaled, leaning back. Fair enough. The next day, Richard arranged for Maya to be brought to his penthouse. Temporarily, he told himself. He wanted to thank her properly, to understand why this stranger cared more for his son in one night than he sometimes had in years. Maya stepped into the glass and steel palace, eyes wide. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline glowing like a promise she was never given. Chandeliers glittered above her, but instead of awe, there was hesitation in her face, as if she didn't belong, as if any wrong move would shatter the illusion. You can sit, Richard said, gesturing toward the couch. She perched on the edge, careful not to touch anything. Her small backpack rested against her knees. Do you need money? Richard asked bluntly, her eyes narrowed. No. He raised an eyebrow. I'm not most people, Maya cut in. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to silence him. Richard studied her. She wasn't lying. There was dignity in her refusal, a stubborn pride that even poverty couldn't steal. You saved Ethan's life, he pressed. There must be something I can do. Maya hesitated. Then she whispered, Don't forget him. The words landed heavier than any financial demand could have. Over the following weeks, Richard visited Ethan daily. Maya did too. At first, he questioned her presence, suspicious of motives, but Ethan, when he finally opened his eyes, asked for her by name. Dad, is Maya here? Ethan rasped, his first coherent sentence since the attack. Richard stiffened. She's around. Bring her, Ethan insisted. And so, Maya became a fixture in their lives. She and Ethan laughed over card games in the hospital bed, whispered about favorite songs, and traded secrets Richard would never be trusted with. Watching them, Richard felt a mix of gratitude and shame, gratitude for the bond that revived his son's spirit, shame that he had to witness it through the lens of an outsider. But not everyone welcomed Maya. One afternoon, as Richard wheeled Ethan through the hospital garden, a nurse pulled him aside. Mr. Lawson, she said carefully, you may want to reconsider allowing that girl so much access. Richard's jaw tightened. Why? The nurse hesitated. She comes from a rough background. We can't be certain of her intentions. Richard's gaze followed Maya, who was picking dandelions to weave into a crown for Ethan. The sight was disarming, innocent. Yet the nurse's tone carried an old prejudice he recognized. Her intention, Richard said coldly, was to save my son's life. Unless you've done more, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself. The nurse flushed and stepped back. But Richard knew the world would not make it easy for Maya. That night, Richard lay awake in his penthouse, city lights flickering across the ceiling. He thought of the moments he had missed in Ethan's life. School plays, soccer games, late-night talks. He thought of Maya, fierce in her smallness, unbending in her honesty. For the first time in years, Richard Lawson, the man who once believed money solved everything, felt powerless. And in that powerlessness, a seed of change began to take root, but change never comes without resistance. And in the shadows of the city, someone else had already begun to stir, someone who knew Maya, someone who wasn't ready to let her go. And when he showed up, everything they had built would be put to the test. Nights in the Lawson penthouse were quiet, too quiet for Maya Carter. The silence pressed against her ears like a weight. She lay awake on the plush guest bed, staring at the ceiling. The sheets were softer than anything she'd ever known, but comfort couldn't drown out the unease gnawing in her stomach. Ethan slept in the next room, still recovering, his breathing faint but steady. She often tiptoed to his doorway to make sure. She owed him that much, because deep down she feared what might come next. Richard was awake too. He stood by the window of his private office, scotch untouched in his glass, staring at the city he usually controlled like a chessboard. But this time the board felt unsteady. His son had been attacked. His savior was a child who didn't belong to him. And somewhere in the cracks of Maya's guarded silences, he sensed a story darker than she was willing to tell. Finally, Richard broke the silence. Maya, he called from the doorway. Come here. She hesitated, then padded into the office, rubbing her tired eyes. "You're not sleeping," Richard said. "Neither are you," she replied flatly. He smirked despite himself. "Fair enough." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Maya climbed in, her small frame dwarfed by the leather seat. She hugged her knees to her chest, eyes darting between Richard and the glowing skyline. "Tell me the truth," Richard said quietly. "Who are you running from?" Maya froze. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Darnell." Richard leaned forward. "Darnell who?" Her voice trembled. "Darnell Brooks, my mom's boyfriend. He says I belong to him now." Richard's jaw tightened. He had heard that name before. A man with a reputation in the shadows of the city, known for violence, drugs, and intimidation. Richard suddenly understood why Maya flinched at loud noises, why she slept with her backpack zipped tight beside her, why her laughter always carried an edge of fear. "He hit you?" Richard's voice was low, dangerous. Maya didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. Richard sat back, chest heaving. He was a man who could topple corporations, who could silence rivals with a single phone call. But in this moment he realized money meant nothing to a child trapped in fear. "We'll keep you safe," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." Maya's eyes widened. "People say that all the time." "Nobody ever does," Richard swallowed hard. This was more than a promise. This was a test of the man he claimed to be. The next day, Richard's lawyers and private security team filled the penthouse living room. Their suits, their briefcases, their clipped voices made Maya shrink into the corner of the couch. "We need to establish legal guardianship," one lawyer said. "Right now she has no protection in the eyes of the state." Richard rubbed his temple. "Then file whatever needs filing." "It's not that simple," the lawyer replied. "Social services will ask questions. The courts will want proof. They don't look kindly on billionaires adopting street kids overnight. They'll assume exploitation unless what?" Richard snapped. "Unless Maya's background checks out. And if this Darnell is her legal guardian figure, he has leverage." The room fell silent. Maya shifted uncomfortably, gripping her backpack like armor. "So he can just take me back?" she asked, her voice breaking. "No," Richard said instantly. But the lawyer hesitated, and the hesitation told her everything. Maya stood abruptly, storming out of the room. Ethan, sitting nearby with a blanket over his lap, shot his father a sharp glare. "Nice going, Dad," Richard cursed under his breath and followed her. He found Maya curled up by the window in the guest room, eyes glistening but defiant. "You don't get it," she whispered. "People like me don't win against people like him. The system doesn't care." Richard crouched to her level. His voice softened. "Then we won't fight as people like you. We'll fight as people like me. And I don't lose." Maya studied him, as if trying to measure if this was another empty adult promise. Slowly, cautiously, she nodded. That night, the planning began. Richard called in favors from judges, social workers, and even journalists. He met with his PR chief in the dead of night. "We control the narrative," he ordered. "No one paints her as a problem. She's the hero who saved my son." But while Richard maneuvered the world of influence, Maya faced a different battle. Ethan was her confidant. They whispered late into the night, trading secrets. "I don't understand why your dad cares so much about money," Maya admitted one night, fiddling with the IV cord on Ethan's arm. Ethan chuckled weakly. "Neither do I. I mean, it's great, flying first class, getting the newest phone before anyone else. But sometimes I'd trade it all if he'd show up, you know?" Maya looked at him, startled by how their lives, so different on the surface, carried the same ache of absence. "Maybe now he will," she said softly. But Ethan's eyes darkened. "Or maybe it's too late." The words lingered, heavy and unresolved, as both of them drifted into uneasy sleep. Days blurred into weeks. Maya's presence became routine, her laughter echoing through the penthouse, her stubborn honesty grounding both Ethan and Richard. Yet shadows followed her. One evening, a letter slipped under the penthouse door. "No return address. Just one line scrawled in jagged ink. She's mine. You can't keep her." Richard's blood ran cold. He doubled security overnight. Guards are stationed at every entrance. Surveillance cameras have been updated and panic buttons have been installed. Yet the note haunted him, more dangerous for its simplicity. Maya found him pacing at 3 a.m., fists clenched. "You're scared too," she said quietly. Richard stopped. He had built a career on never showing fear, but he couldn't deny it. "Yes," Maya tilted her head. "Good. Means you'll fight harder." It was a strange comfort. A child reminding a man how to be brave. But the real test came at the first guardianship hearing. Richard arrived in a navy suit. Maya in a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit but made her look older. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, flashing cameras and shouting questions. "Mr. Lawson, are you adopting her? Is this a charity or something else? Did she really save your son, or is this a publicity stunt?" Richard tightened his grip on Maya's hand. She flinched but didn't pull away. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than any hospital. The judge peered over his glasses. "Mr. Lawson, this is highly irregular. Children like Miss Carter usually enter the foster system." "Why intervene personally?" Richard's jaw set. "Because she is not a statistic. She's a person. And she saved my son's life." The judge leaned back, unimpressed. "Heroic acts do not substitute for legal guardianship." At that moment, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man entered, eyes hard, grin cruel. Darnell Brooks. Maya's face drained of color. She whispered, barely audible, "He found me." Richard turned, locking eyes with the man who had haunted this child's nightmares. Darnell smiled, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. The tension snapped like a live wire. For the first time, Richard realized this wasn't just about paperwork. This was war, and it had only just begun. The courtroom fell into silence as Darnell Brooks stepped forward. His boots echoed on the polished floor, each thud heavy with menace. He wore a pressed shirt, too crisp for a man with his reputation, but the sneer curling on his lips betrayed the mask. Maya shrank in her seat, hands trembling in her lap. Richard noticed. Without thinking, he slid his hand over hers, steadying it. She flinched at first, then held tight. The judge adjusted his glasses. "And you are?" "Her guardian," Darnell said smoothly. "Been looking everywhere for my little girl. Didn't think she'd be hiding in some billionaire's palace." Maya's throat tightened. "I'm not your little girl." The words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant. The judge tapped his pen. "Mr. Brooks, do you have proof of legal guardianship?" Darnell smirked. "Got papers. Signed by her mama before she disappeared. Maya belongs with me." He slid a folder across the table. Richard's lawyer opened it, frowning. The documents were crude but official enough to raise doubt. A ripple of unease swept through the courtroom. Richard leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "You mean forged?" Darnell's eyes glinted. "You rich folks think you own the world. But this girl? She's mine. Always has been." Maya's stomach twisted. The room spun. Memories of nights hiding in closets, of slammed doors and bruises, threatened to drown her. She squeezed Richard's hand harder. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson, unless you can prove otherwise, the court cannot disregard—" "Objection," Richard's lawyer cut in. "We have witness testimony." The courtroom stirred. The back door opened again. A woman stepped in, tall, weary, but familiar. Maya's breath caught. "Aunt Denise?" Her aunt nodded, tears brimming. "I came as soon as I heard." "That man is no guardian. He terrorized her." "I'll testify under oath." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you can confirm custody?" Denise shook her head. "No, I failed her when she needed me most. But I'll not stand by and let him steal her life." Darnell's face darkened. "Lies! She's covering for the girl." Richard rose from his seat, slow, deliberate. His voice filled the chamber, controlled yet burning. "This is not about lies. This is about a child who risked her life for mine. A child who deserves more than fear and fists. You want proof?" He turned to the reporters scribbling notes in the back rows. "Look at my son. Alive because of her. That's proof enough." The words struck like thunder. Cameras clicked wildly. The public's gaze shifted. No longer billionaire versus street man, but hero child versus abuser. The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" But the tension only grew. Darnell slammed his palm against the table, snarling. You think money can erase the past? She'll come back. She always comes back, Maya stood then. Her knees shook, but her voice was steady. No, I won't. Not ever. The silence was deafening. Her petite figure, dwarfed by oak benches and marble walls, seemed to tower above everyone. The courtroom wasn't just watching. They were holding their breath. Richard's chest swelled. For the first time, he wasn't her shield. She was her own. The judge leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. Given testimony and concerns for the child's welfare, temporary guardianship is granted to Richard Lawson pending full investigation. The gavel came down with a crack. Cheers erupted from reporters. Ethan, sitting in the front row with a blanket over his legs, broke into a grin. Maya exhaled, shoulders trembling with relief, but Darnell didn't move. He stood, teeth bared, eyes burning holes into Maya. This ain't over, he hissed. Richard stepped forward, blocking his view. Yes, it is. Security closed in, escorting Darnell out. But his words lingered, poisonous. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with flashing cameras and shouts. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust like weapons. Mr. Lawson! Why fight so hard for this girl? Richard looked down at Maya beside him, her small hand gripping his. For once, he didn't rehearse an answer. He spoke from somewhere raw. Because she fought for us first. Maya blinked up at him, stunned. For a moment, the world's noise faded, but peace didn't last long. That night, a video surfaced online. Grainy security footage of Maya running through alleys, chased by shadows, long before she met Ethan. The headline blared, "Street Girl's Dark Past. Should a billionaire be her guardian?" Richard threw the tablet across the room. They're twisting her story. Maya's eyes welled. They always do. Ethan, sitting beside her, clenched his fists. So tell them the truth. Make them hear it from you. Richard looked between the two kids, his son and the girl who had saved him. His heart pounded with clarity. You're right, he said. No more hiding. We take control. Days later, a press conference filled the marble atrium of the Lawson Foundation. Cameras lined every wall. Richard stood at the podium, but it wasn't him the world came to hear. It was Maya. Her hands shook as she adjusted the microphone. The lights were blinding, the crowd endless. But when she spoke, her voice was steady, carrying more power than she thought possible. My name is Maya Carter, she began. I'm 12 years old. I don't have much. But when I saw Ethan Lawson lying on the ground that night, I didn't think about money or who he was. I just thought about helping. The room stilled. I've been called poor, trash, invisible. But I'm not invisible. And kids like me, we matter. We deserve to be safe. We deserve to be seen. Her words rippled like shockwaves. Some reporters lowered their cameras, simply listening. Richard's throat tightened. Ethan smiled through tears. And in that moment, Maya wasn't just the girl who saved a billionaire's son. She was a voice for every child the world had overlooked. The climax had shifted. The fight wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was in the hearts of everyone watching, and no one could look away. The gavel struck once, then silence. The courtroom, packed with lawyers, social workers, and curious onlookers, held its breath. The decision had been made. Richard closed his eyes, gripping Ethan's hand. Maya sat between them, tiny but unshaken, her gaze fixed on the judge. For weeks, they had battled every obstacle, skeptical social workers, endless background checks, Reggie's poisonous lies, and a system that valued paperwork over people. Now finally, the ruling was clear. Richard Lawson was granted guardianship of Maya Williams. Applause broke out from the back. Neighbors, volunteers, even reporters who had followed Maya's story. But Maya herself didn't move. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. Richard leaned close. Maya, did you hear? You're coming home with us. Her lip trembled. She whispered, for real? Not just until they change their minds? Richard's throat burned. For real? No one's taking you away? Ethan wrapped an arm around her. You're stuck with us now, kid. And for the first time, Maya let out a laugh, small, shaky, but real. a sound that cracked through the heaviness of the courtroom like sunlight breaking storm clouds. The Lawson mansion had never known this kind of life. For years it was silent halls, empty rooms, and the constant hum of staff who never lingered. But now, there was laughter. Maya and Ethan chased each other through the gardens, their sneakers pounding across the manicured grass. They splashed in the pool, ate midnight snacks in the kitchen, and turned Richard's mahogany study into a fortress of pillows and blankets. At first, Richard stood in the doorway, awkward, watching. A man used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, but not spilled popcorn and paint-stained hands. Then one night, Maya tugged his sleeve. "You're not allowed just to stand there. You have to play, too." He frowned. "Play?" She nodded with absolute seriousness. "Yeah, otherwise you're missing the best part." So Richard sat on the carpet. He picked up a crayon, and when he looked at Maya's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun, something inside him cracked open, for the first time in decades. Richard Lawson laughed until his stomach hurt, but healing wasn't simple. Reggie didn't vanish quietly. He lingered on the streets, muttering threats, whispering to anyone who would listen that the billionaire had stolen his blood. One night, Richard's security team caught him near the gates. A knife in his pocket, rage in his eyes. "You think money makes her yours?" Reggie spat at Richard through the bars. "She's mine. She'll always be mine." Maya, hearing the shouting from her window, froze. The shadows of her past clawed back instantly. Every bruise, every scream, every night she prayed someone would take her away. Richard climbed the stairs to her room minutes later. She sat curled in the corner, hugging her knees. "Hey!" His voice softened, stripped of power, stripped of pride. "He can't hurt you anymore." "Not while I'm here." Her eyes lifted. "But what if he comes back? What if nobody believes me?" Richard knelt, lowering himself to her level. "Then I'll make them believe. I promise you that, Maya. You're not invisible anymore." And for the first time, she believed him. Weeks later, Maya stood on a stage. It wasn't a courtroom this time. It was a community center, filled with kids who looked like her. Kids who knew fear. Kids who knew hunger. Kids who knew what it was like to feel unseen. The microphone trembled in her small hand. Reporters flashed cameras. Richard and Ethan sat in the front row, smiling but silent, letting her shine. "My name is Maya Williams," she began, her voice wavering, "and for a long time people didn't see me. They only saw where I came from. They saw my old clothes, my skin, my broken family, and they decided I didn't matter." A hush fell over the crowd. "But one night I saw someone else hurt, and I stayed. I didn't stay because I thought I'd get anything. I stayed because it was the right thing. And sometimes, the smallest people can do the biggest things." Her chin lifted, her voice steady now. "I'm not just a girl from the wrong street. I'm not just someone's case file, I'm me. And I'm not afraid anymore." The applause was thunderous. Richard felt his eyes sting. Ethan grinned so wide it hurt his cheeks. And in that moment, Maya wasn't just rescued. She was reborn. Life settled into a rhythm. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real. There were mornings when Maya still woke screaming, caught in nightmares. Richard would sit beside her bed until the shaking stopped, whispering, "You're safe. I've got you." There were days when the press hounded them, trying to twist Maya's story into headlines. Richard, once addicted to controlling the narrative, now only cared about protecting hers. There were moments when Ethan still struggled, resentful of his father's late transformation, angry at years of neglect. But slowly, with Maya's laughter stitching them together, they found their way back. On her 12th birthday, Maya sat between Richard and Ethan at the dinner table. The cake had too many candles, the frosting was lopsided, but her smile was flawless. She closed her eyes to make a wish. When she blew out the candles, Richard leaned close and asked, "What did you wish for?" She giggled. "If I tell you, it won't come true." But the truth was, her wish had already come true. Months later, Richard stood on a stage of his own. He was no longer speaking as a billionaire CEO. He wasn't talking about profits, stocks, or quarterly earnings. He was speaking as a father. "There was a time I thought money could fix anything," he told the crowd. But money couldn't fix my absence. It couldn't buy my son's trust. It couldn't erase a little girl's pain. Only love could do that. And I learned I had been bankrupt in the one thing that truly matters. He paused, glancing down at the front row where Maya and Ethan sat side by side. I stand here today, not as a man who saved a child, but as a man whom she saved. The audience rose in a standing ovation, and as Richard stepped down, Maya ran into his arms, whispering, "Told you. You just had to play too." The camera pans wide, a once lonely billionaire, a son who nearly slipped away, and a girl the world wanted to forget, now walking hand in hand through a sunlit park. Not perfect. Not finished, but together, because family isn't built by blood or money. It's built by staying when it matters most. Sometimes the most powerful rescues don't come from heroes in capes. They come from the smallest voices, the ones the world overlooks. That night, when Maya chose not to walk away, she didn't just save Ethan's life. She changed Richard's. She rewrote the story of a family that didn't even know it was missing a piece. And she reminded us all of something we so easily forget. That compassion costs nothing, but it can mean everything. Richard Lawson had wealth beyond imagination, but no check, no company, no boardroom ever gave him what Maya did, a reason to show up not as a CEO but as a father. Ethan gained not only his father back, but a sister who taught him resilience, laughter, and loyalty. And Maya, she found more than safety. She found belonging. She found her voice. She found out that her past did not define her, and her future was hers to claim. But this isn't a fairy tale. Healing is not a single moment, it is a journey. Maya still carries scars. Ethan still battles with trust. Richard still stumbles as he learns to love without control. The shadows of the past don't vanish overnight. Yet every step forward, every meal shared, every night they end the day under the same roof is proof. Proof that brokenness can become beauty. Proof that family is chosen as much as it is born. Proof that even in a world that often looks away, love can force us to look closer, and maybe that's the point. Because Maya's story isn't just hers. It belongs to every child who has ever been unseen, unheard, unloved. It belongs to every parent who realizes too late what truly matters, but still dares to change. It belongs to all of us, reminding us that kindness, stubborn, unwavering kindness, has the power to rewrite lives. So the next time you see someone in need, someone small, someone overlooked, remember Maya. Remember that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet voice on the other end of the phone refusing to walk away. This story began with fear. It ended with family. And somewhere in between, a little girl taught us what it really means to be human.